I will say that I did a lot of research for the book, and for like the surface of the book, like I have a source for almost every detail. But of course, a source for a fiction writer is much different than a journalist. One of the difficulties the West has in writing about North Korea is that nothing can be validated or confirmed about anyone's stories, and that's a prerequisite for journalism. And that makes it a land of speculation. But when you talk to people or read stories or interview people, and like I have a source for I talked to a GI who's one of the few people to cross the DMZ, and he got drunk on his post, and he drank 10 beers and wandered north across the DMZ. There's only a handful of people who've lived through the landmines. When the North Koreans caught him, the first thing they did when they saw his USMC tattoo is they cut it off with a knife. They were offended by that. So, it's a land where things that are outside of our norm, happen pretty regularly. The big question is, what's it like? You can talk about, I feel confident about the facts I provided in many areas. I can tell you the exact ones I made up, But what is the truth? What's the psychological truth of being raised in a totalitarian regime in which your identity is not entirely up to you? And what's it like to have that sense of self curtailed? That's something only a North Korean could really do and create, and we won't know until they're free enough to tell their tales. There's kind of a crop of, if I feel good about one thing that my book created, is that following it, New York said, hey, money could be made off North Korea. And like most of the major publishing houses have published memoirs of North Koreans. And just this year alone, 7 have come out. So these are the real voices and not some guy in California, doing his best to fake it. But part of the question is did I feel free in writing about a place in which, what I was saying couldn't be confirmed? I am a writer who likes to create vast worlds. In fact, that's one of the great joys I take from writing, is building an entire world with its own rules, populating it and detailing it, believing in it myself. I will say that probably the great fiction of my book is that one character would move and experience all of these things. Most people seem to speak of curtailed lives, like, I was in a fish factory and I was going to can fish my entire life until the famine came and these people died and I had to go, So people don't seem to have this difference experience. The great liberation for them is their 7 years of mandatory military service. Here we wouldn't think that was a stroke of fortune, but there they get to see North Korea. A friend of mine, Martin, runs the Google North Korea at Johns Hopkins University, and it is like the platform of Google Earth, just about North Korea, but it's curated by experts. And so every time someone goes to North Korea, he's like, hey, take a picture of this building at this intersection. I don't have a picture. So if you look on it, it's fascinating. All 157 cell phone towers are geotagged on it. Every dam, every military base, every installation, everything there is there. But in talking to Martin, he told me an amazing thing. He can track the IP addresses of people who come to his website, and he has this huge contingent of North Koreans who are constantly visiting his website because they don't know anything about North Korea either. They don't have any real information about where they live and what life is like there and what's in these provinces. And so they want to know about North Korea as much as we do. As I was writing the book, I found the portraits of North Korea in our media pretty rudimentary. North Korea is depicted as a land of evil, insanity, or clownishness, lots of buffoonery, like, a puppet of Kim Jong-il and Team America World Police singing, I'm so Ronry, right? I think that's because there's a pass on making fun of North Korea, like, you can make jokes about them, and you're probably never going to meet a North Korean, and nobody's going to call you to account for that joke. Whereas no one would make a joke about Rwanda or Syria, right? So I think there was a lot of footloose reporting on that place and a lot of caricature. But just before my book came out in January 2012, on December 19th, 2011, just a couple weeks before, Kim Jong-il suddenly died. You know, it took us a few days to figure that out. The story of how he died, they say he died on a train going to visit the people, but we have satellite photos of that train in the station. So his circumstances of his death are equally as mysterious as his father's. But suddenly people began asking, what is it like to be a North Korean? What is it like over there? For the first time in the years I was writing about the place, people seemed genuinely curious on what is it? What are those humans' experiences there? And I'll give this last thing on this question. One thing they had a question about was we all saw Kim Jong-il's funeral, or at least snippets of it, on TV. And it was a cold, cold winter day in Pyongyang, and there was this somber procession, and there were thousands of people weeping, right? And just as they had wept, when Kim Il-sung died. But we saw this video of all these people weeping, and people asked me hundreds of times, were they really crying or were they faking it? We wanted to know what was inside their minds. This is obviously a person who lessened the lives of everyone in his nation, and yet he was the only leader they knew, and he was a paternal figure. And his father had been a paternal figure. Did they really miss the dictator who, like I say, lessened their lives? But I would say this, that is a very Western question. Were they crying or not crying? We live in a land of choices, right? We get to choose. I believe that or I don't believe that. I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. I like ice cream, I don't, right? So we each one of us is encouraged to choose paths in our lives and our own beliefs. And we're they're either faking it or not. But it's difficult for North Koreans to understand our abstractions. There's a famous video, you can look it up online, of Shin Dong-hook. He's a North Korean defector. And he's asked on camera what the word freedom means now that he's in Seoul, South Korea. And he just kind of looks around, baffled, searching for the longest time. And finally, he can't say anything. This word freedom. But I would challenge you to define the word freedom. It's one of our elusive abstractions that we all take for granted. You would have to write a personal essay, I bet you, to define the word freedom. It's something we slowly absorb over our entire lives, that we are entitled to self-definition in a certain way. And you know what? In just a couple years, he could not absorb that abstraction, that it wasn't native to him. But it's hard for us to absorb North Korean abstractions, and that's what I tried to do in this book. For North Koreans, I believe the truth and the lie are folded together in a way we are not used to, right? The lie and the truth can be one there, whereas we spend our whole lives trying to keep those things separate. But there, Kim Jong-il is your father. He is the entire nation. He is everything, and yet he is the monster, right? And there was one just final thing. At that funeral was an interesting thing. Maybe you saw it. In North Korea, there's this thing called spontaneous bark carving. Dendrographs form in trees. I hope that sounds funny to you. At night, trees will often spontaneously carve a slogan in their bark. And when you're in North Korea, they take you to see these. And the slogans will often say, "Oh, Kim Jong-il, you're the greatest," or "North Korea will dominate the world." And so they take you to these trees, and these trees have supposedly, of their own free will, taken their branches and carved, or I don't know how they do it, carved, these Hangul slogans down their trunks, and they literally take you to them as proof that nature is ratifying the regime. And during Kim Jong-il's funeral, in the dead of winter, there was a video of people lining up to kneel down before a tree, a cold, frozen Pyongyang tree in the snow. And in its bark was a message that said, "We miss you, Kim Jong-il." the tree had missed him. And these people were taking turns, kneeling down, weeping before the truth of this tree's message. Now, these people are just as smart as we are, right? There is no way one of them could ever have believed the truth of this. And yet they must believe it. They knew, that's an example in which I know they knew this was a total lie, because they're humans, right? Trees don't carve themselves, and yet they had to weep. And so the truth and the lie were fused in a way that we need to think about in approaching other people's experiences.